So, I want to share my experience and more prominently how I know I will now recover from long COVID and how I will make a full and healthy recovery. And not only will I make that recovery, but this person I will be after that recovery will be someone who is more equipped to fight life and battle life and live a long, happy, fulfilled life. And let me tell you why. Now, long COVID for 18 months and counting, I still have symptoms regularly. A couple of weeks ago I was completely housebound after overstepping the mark, but I'll tell you what's changed. So, long COVID is exceptionally odd. It takes the average person, and chronic fatigue and all of these chronic syndromes, even chronic pain, back pain, etc. It takes people a while to understand what on earth is going on. How is it that I'm overnight, I go from running marathons, wearing my Seville marathon top from February 2022, it must have been. How can I go from that exceptionally fit person to someone who can't get up the stairs? But more importantly, how can you explain the varying nature of the symptoms? One day I'm able to do 150% more than the day before when I'm able to do nothing. And anyone with long COVID or a chronic condition will agree with me that there's no rhyme or reason often about, sometimes you eat a food and you feel awful the next day, but then 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, you eat that food again and you feel fine. Now, this just doesn't obey the natural laws of what cause and result or cause and effect. And if we treat symptoms as pain, ultimately that's what they are. Even if it's a fluttering heartbeat, a migraine, whatever it is, it's pain. It doesn't obey the natural laws of pain. And you've got to get curious about that. For example, if you break your arm, you fall off a tree and break your arm, the recovery trajectory is completely linear. You go from this amount of pain and over the weeks, and give or take if you don't hit it, re-hit it or whatever, but the recovery progression is completely linear. That's not the same with long COVID. With long COVID, as I said earlier, your symptoms go up and down. And with a broken arm, they never disappear. The pain or the functionality you never randomly regain it, or it never gets worse at night, which is often a thing with long COVID. And if you're like me, you internalize that. You think, am I making this up? I go on holiday and I feel better, and then I come back and I feel worse. Am I just lazy and I like being on holiday all the time? Which isn't the case. So you've got to ask yourself those questions. Why is that happening? Why is it obeying these really unpredictable results? And it's horrible because it takes a long time to realize that. And if you're a type A person that this does disproportionately hit these conditions, you don't listen to your body because you're trying to use it as means to an end. You're trying to max out what you can achieve. So it's hard to listen to your body, especially when those symptoms come on. So just taking a pause there. So, sorry, I'm doing a rudimentary stretching routine now. So, for me, the key thing that I've understood, and it was, it was a penny drop in the mindset shift, was understanding a little bit more about how pain works. So pain exists in the brain, full stop. If you break your arm, it's your brain that sends pain. It's essentially an alerting mechanism. Your brain needs to communicate with you, the proprietor of all the action. There's a problem here. So you step on a nail, your brain goes, pain, go and deal with this. That's why pain is so intolerable, because you can't continue with your life. You have to address the issue at hand. But then it gets spookier when you look into it more. So Dr. Howard Schubiner, for me, was a really big breakthrough here, right? But the principle, you don't need to understand the science. The principles are very similar. Just ask yourself, these questions as an intelligent human being. Pain also appears when there is no structural problem. The best example of this which featured in the British Medical Journal, was when an English construction worker jumped off a ladder in his steel boots, or whatever boots he was wearing, and went straight through a nail. A nail went straight through his boot, through the bottom, seemingly right through the foot, and out of the top of the boot. And he shrieked in pain. He was rushed to hospital. in fits of pain and anguish. They took the boot off and they discovered that the nail went in between the toes, causing zero damage whatsoever. But he still felt that pain. Now, how can that work? What's that about? Well, it strengthens the theory that pain is in the brain and it's an alerting mechanism. The brain has jumped on a nail, it's gone through the boot, right through the middle of the boot, and the brain can only assume that there's an immense amount of need to ring that alarm and signal that there's pain there so that you'd address it. But there's no structural problem. So that's interesting. That's evidence point number one. Now you can go further with it as well. You know, how do you explain phantom pain in amputated legs? You know, the leg isn't even there and you're feeling a pain or an itch. A really key piece of understanding for me was hearing this, that when you get the flu or when you get a virus, everyone will understand that or recognise that you feel tired just before or and during the flu while your body's dealing with the flu. You feel very tired. Now, it's not the virus that makes you tired. The virus has no impact on your fatigue levels, but it's the brain that makes you tired. Now, why would the brain do that? Well, the brain is recognising that it's got a very invasive virus like COVID entering the body. It sees that and it makes the decision to say, right, we need to make sure, you could call it the host, me, you, anyone, doesn't do too much because we've got to battle on all fronts here to fight off this really invasive virus. So it sends you fatigue to guide you to not overexert yourself because it needs all energy to fight the virus. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Now, so it can send you fatigue. So that brain mechanism now, you know, we understand that all pain is in the brain, but it can also send you things like fatigue. But more critically, the brain can create a reality where it guides you to do a certain thing, be it rest, because a virus is here. So that suddenly becomes really interesting. And when you realise with long COVID that symptoms come on, they go away, you know, throughout the experience of long COVID, it's bizarre and it doesn't make sense. And there is nothing wrong with you structurally with long COVID. I mean, obviously, the first port of call is to ensure that's the case and there's nothing more sinister at play. But there's, you know, everyone, I've had my heart checked, I've had blood tests, you know, I've done it all, and then nothing comes back wrong. And that's, you know, one explanation rationally is, well, then they don't have the technology to do the test to find out what's wrong with me. But another is a much more hopeful one and a much truer one if you think about it, that why can't long COVID and these chronic conditions be the brain sending you symptoms in order to keep you safe? Just like when the virus came along, it sends you fatigue to render you inactive. But why would it do that? And that's an important question, one you need to be able to answer. Well, ask yourself what happened before you got ill. What kind of life were you leading? If I look at my life, I look at, you know, in the period of about 2-3 years during the pandemic, I got COVID 4 or 5 times. In addition, I was running, you know, a lot, you know, typically a healthy pastime. I can think of much more unhealthy pastimes, but still in an unhealthy fashion, I think. I was, you know, dedicated. There wasn't much self-compassion being practiced. You know, if I'd, you know, not only was I, you know, going out on the weekend like most 20-somethings, but, you know, if I did and I'd have a hangover, I'd then say, right, we're running 5K extra today, as opposed to, you know, putting the plug on it and saying, hey, let's have a rest day. You know, ultimately a lack of self-compassion. Now, all of those things, you know, getting COVID, you know, alone 4 times in 2 years is an extreme amount of stress on the body. And the body doesn't know that, or the brain doesn't know that it's a pandemic and it's temporary and it's not going to persist forever. The brain doesn't know that. But at some point, when the brain's at its threshold of what it can take, be it physical stress, emotional stress being a really key one, the brain cannot tell the difference between emotional pain and physical pain. So if you're someone who's hyper anxious, it's the equivalent of putting an immense amount of load on your physiology. And eventually the body's going to turn around. It's going to send you symptoms lightly. And if you're like me, before getting long COVID properly, where where I was really, housebound, bedbound, at its worst, I realize now that I was being sent these symptoms of fatigue, and what they are, they're messages from the body saying, hey, we need to slow down. And if you don't listen to those messages, which, type A people who want to achieve everything yesterday often don't, then what other choice do you give the body? It has to eventually say no. It's saying, I can't handle this. You keep doing it. I've got to snap things off now. And, from an evolutionary point of view, well, it can't make sense for the body to do that, render you completely incapable, as everyone is with this condition. Some people to a real extreme where they can't even, have a light bulb on or hear a loud noise. But that can't be of evolutionary benefit. Why would the brain want to do that? The brain's only interest is to survive. Or its number one priority is to survive. That's all it cares about. The brain doesn't care about you having a happy life. It cares about surviving. So why would it do this? In our evolutionary past, we grew up in, they've spent the majority of our evolution in times where there were real predators hunting us down and lots of real threats. Rendering you completely incapable would be a real anti-survival move, unless you realise that the path you were on was leading to a more dangerous situation than a temporary debilitation, or even a long COVID is long. And when you realise that, you realise there's a lesson to learn. And once you learn that lesson, you get out of the really stressful job, or you make those life decisions. Or sometimes it doesn't have to be too vast. I mean, just not getting COVID 4 times in 2 years is enough for the brain to go, okay, let's give this guy a little bit more energy. And once you get that more energy, for me at least, I was 15 months in and sort of kept going up and down. And then I made the really important realization of just what we talked about how the brain works. I realized that whenever symptoms came along, I panicked internally. And meditation really allowed me to identify that panic. Otherwise, I would have gone under the radar, But I've spent a good, 12, 18 months, pretty much the whole tenure with long COVID, in a state of panic. We talk about nervous system dysregulation, fight or flight state. But what's important is that panic. Now, that panic, as I talked about earlier, the brain can't tell the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. So if you're stuck in a sense of panic, the brain is going to interpret that as you're in danger. And, long COVID stops your life in its tracks, or at least it did for me. My self-esteem went through the floor because I moved away from my job. I no longer had my hobbies, my running, my going to the gym, all of that crumbled. So, and then you're left with this diagnosis of this poorly medically understood, incurable. It's not incurable, it's totally curable. Millions of people recover this and live full, happy lives and never remember their experience again. But the weight of that anguish is immense. It's torture to think that your life's over where it stands. You don't know how to get better or when you will get better. It's a prison sentence, and prison is awful not because of the conditions. What's awful about prison, the physical prison, jail, is the lack of freedom, and that is what long COVID does and these conditions do. They take away your freedom. You have no control over if you'll be able to do something on X or Y day. And that thought is exhausting. And it's enough to trigger the brain to say, yes, you are in pain. Let's continue on this cycle. Now, when you come to the realization that the brain can create this and there's nothing structurally wrong with you, you realize that the brain is stuck on a loop of thinking you're in danger and therefore sending you symptoms in order to essentially narrow down your life. Think about everyone with long COVID. What it does to them is it narrows down their life entirely. Now, wouldn't that be the perfect outcome for a brain that thinks it's in hyper threat mode? It creates a set of symptoms and tricks you into thinking there's something really starkly wrong so that you curtail all of your operations. I mean, if you think about it, you get symptoms when you go outside and do a 10-minute walk. You get a symptom, you go home, you say, right, I don't do any more 10-minute walks. Over 18 months, you end up not doing anything. Now, what an outcome for a brain. That's the perfect outcome for a brain that doesn't want you to overexert yourself, and it actually wants you to do nothing. So when you realize that these symptoms are as a result of nothing being wrong with you, but this oversensitive brain, essentially the brain's got the wrong idea, or maybe it doesn't. If your sole priority was safety, you would be doing the right thing, staying indoors all day. But now's come the time, once you have learnt those lessons initially that long COVID needs to teach you, and you've removed the stress, whatever it is, from your life, now comes the time to address the brain and say, look, you're only interested in survival, I get that. I'm listening to you now. I'm not going to ignore you, I'm listening to you. I'm interested in survival as well, so we're relying on that. But I'm also interested in living a happy and fulfilling life, which essentially sacrifices a little bit of risk, because you have to leave the house and exert yourself and use resources in order to find that happiness. Now, and you need to outrank your brain. You've got to think of it as your brain has essentially grounded you. You've been messing about for so long that your brain's gone, you know what, we're locking the doors, you're not leaving anymore. It's essentially done that. A teenage kid who's been grounded, they can leave the house, they physically can, but the mum or the dad or in this case the brain doesn't let them. So when you realise these symptoms as a result of nothing structurally wrong, and instead it is essentially a warning signal from the brain, you can respond without fear. You can say, I hear you, brain. Prehistoric, primitive, brain, immensely powerful, but only focused on survival. I hear you on that. Let me take your message in. These symptoms, you're saying, I'm worried, I'm not safe. You look around in your environment, you are safe, there's no physical harm to come to, and you just outrank it. And once you do that, the brain's unable to wreak havoc as it was before. Think of it as a petulant child. A child falls over at a playground, looks up at, scrapes their knee, looks up at their parent, and is looking at their reaction as to whether they should cry or not. And if the parent comes over and goes, oh my God, oh my God, how are you? Oh, what's happened? You'll see that the tears come flooding. Now the brain, in a way, the subconscious mind, in a way, is a petulant child, just like that. The metaphor works because the subconscious mind sends you a symptom, sends you a danger alarm. You respond to it with an immense amount of panic and, oh no, my life's over, I'm never going to get it back. And that then reinforces the subconscious mind to be like, yeah, we were watching his reaction, we were right to send the symptom, he's in danger, let's send another one. And when you realise that is the mechanism at play, it's astounding for two reasons. One, you realise you can recover almost as quickly as you got sick, in that moment. And this is what they talk about brain retraining. Brain retraining is, you don't have to sit there in the darkness and do a boring 10-minute ritual. Brain retraining, you're constantly doing brain retraining by listening to this, you're brain retraining by, when you meet someone and you take in their face and you record it, it's all brain retraining, you're constantly brain retraining. So education about some of these concepts, about how neuroplasticity works and how the brain works, will enable you to have that mindset shift and to disarm the pain signals and the danger alarms. I mean, the other reason, I remember sitting in my garden when I came across this realization, and I was just laughing to myself, and I was thinking, you bastard brain, it's been you all along. There's been nothing wrong with me, and you've just been misfiring. And I thought, look, you needed to do it, and you did need to do it. It needed to happen because I needed to learn this lesson. Post-traumatic growth is for me a really valuable concept, because I can take this lesson into everything in life. And I'm not fully recovered. I have symptoms, on a daily basis, but my relationship with them has completely changed. And over time, like that petulant child, if you stop pandering to it when it falls over, the next couple of times it falls over, it's still going to cry because it's learned that behaviour. But over the months, a couple of months, the kid's going to go, I'm not going to bother crying anymore. I'm not going to bother crying anymore. It didn't work, you know, and that's exactly the relationship you got to have with it. But yeah, this is I mean, I don't even know what this is. This is for my personal use, I think. But